repeat customer.
It's been a while. So I'm Susan Jacobs. I'm a research nurse manager in pulmonary and critical care medicine.
Okay.
And I've not taken the exam.
Oh, come on.
I'm Isabel Reyes. I'm a clinical research nurse in hematology.
Okay.
And I already took certification classes. I've already been certified. I just
Okay, ACRP or SOCRA?
both.
Both?
Wow.
Okay, when did you take the exam?
So I
The
took
ACRP exam.
SOCRA, I just renewed for both of them, but SOCRA's 3 years and ACRP is 2 years.
Right.
So I took SOCRA 3 years ago
Okay.
and ACRP 2 years ago.
Okay, so it's a little hard to read your name because it's upside down.
Oh, sorry.
Isabel is gonna be a good resource for anyone who might want to keep her name in mind. Because having taken the exam fairly recently, it's a good resource.
I heard the SOCRA changed a little bit since last time I took it.
Okay.
And SOCRA's really regulatory based.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's going a little bit more towards the line of ACRP now.
Okay, toward ICH.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, towards more like situational
Yeah,
based
yeah.
versus straight. This
Oh,
is the regular,
road.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, thanks, Isabel. Let's keep going. Introduce yourself.
I'm Uzma, and I'm also a research coordinator in hematology,
Okay.
and I haven't took the exam yet.
Okay, how many years of experience do you have? That just helps us as we go around the room.
So, excuse me.
As a CRC, basically, the question is.
Almost 7 years.
Okay, great.
Hi, my name is Amanda. I'm a CRC for hematology, and I haven't seen the exam. Yeah.
Years of experience?
Less than 1 year.
Less than 1 year? Okay, all right.
My name is Jennifer. I'm clinical research assistant for Liver Clinic. I'm new, fairly new to the research group, so it's been way less than a year.
Okay, great. Okay, well, we're glad you're here. Okay.
Hi, I'm Marty Cooper, I'm a CRC also for immunology and rheumatology, and I'm going to work with.
Okay, great. Hi.
Hi, I'm Sia Bruce, CRC for neurology, and going on 2 years.
Okay.
I'm Catherine, CRC for OBGYN, and in this role for 3 years.
You're a repeat customer.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Elvie is CRC for gastroenterology, and I just completed 2 years in this role.
Okay, good. Welcome. Hi.
Sue, I'm at CRC in child psychiatry, and I'm not taking the exam.
Okay.
My name is Monica. I'm working regulatory in pediatrics, and I've been doing that for about 2 years.
Okay, great.
My name is Lauren. I'm also a CRC in psychiatry, and I'm not taking the exam either.
All right.
My name is Gilia. I'm working as CCTO for cutaneous oncology. I took exam in 2015 and renewed it this year.
Good for you. Good, all right, thanks. So you can give us a recent update. Yeah, okay. Does everyone know Kira at home? But introduce yourself anyway.
Yeah, I'm Kira Larson. I'm the education program manager in the Stanford Center for Clinical Research, and I think I will be taking the exam this summer in Denver. So I have over 6 years of experience in clinical research.
Yeah, okay, great. And Kira's my connection, bringing me in. Okay, good. Hi, introduce yourself.
So, my name is Banu Sharma, and I am in the Stanford Center for Clinical Research. We have approximately 10 years of clinical research
Okay.
experience,
Okay.
and take care of basically the regulatory compliance, of clinical trials.
Okay, okay, great. Hi.
Hi, I'm Marianne. I work in CCTO in I'm clinical quality specialist. And DSMC administrator.
Okay.
And I've been doing this for a long time.
Really?
And
Okay.
and I've threatened to take the exam a couple of times, but I've never, I've qualified for it, but I haven't taken it.
Okay.
It's on my to-do list.
This'll take you over the hump. Okay, great. Okay, hi.
Sammy, I work for the CCTO for quality assurance. I've got a little over 4 years and not planning on taking the exam right now.
Okay.
Alex, I work for cutaneous oncology. I have less than 2 months of experience.
Okay.
I'm Karen. I'm CRC at Pulmonary Division, and I've been doing this for 5 years now, and I am planning on taking the exam.
Good. someone just walked in. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Leslie McNeil. I work in anesthesia. I'm a clinical research coordinator, and I've been there for about 2.5 years, and then 5 years before that in psychiatry as a research coordinator, and I'm planning to take the course.
Okay, great, good. Do you have a name tag for?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Did I miss anyone? Anyone come in late that I missed? Okay, great. So let's go through a couple of logistics.
Everybody have one of these for names?
I will move around, so make sure you can see the slides. Our objectives today are, at the end of the class, we want to be able to at least list the 5 ICH guidelines that, the key guidelines used in international clinical trials, and describe the significant points of these guidelines. So we can't just say, oh yes, I know that E6 is called good clinical practices. We really need to look into them in a little more detail. And also the Declaration of Helsinki, which is our foundation for good clinical practices. And then I would like you to be able to list the 3 strategies for taking the exam. That's one of the points of the class, is to get you thinking about what you would do to prep for the exam. Sometimes people take this kind of a class to see whether they ever want to take the exam or see what kind of prep they need to do. It's offered, the ACRP exam is offered twice a year. So just key points, I'm not going to go around the room, but what do you want to learn today? What are a few things that you really want to get out of today when we're talking about looking at key ICH guidelines or preparing for the exam? What are a few key things we want to talk about today? Yes?
Safety, clinical safety management.
Safety management, okay. There's a guideline for that. There's an app for that. All right, safety management, okay, what else? What's going on? 2 or 3 more. Why did you get up at 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock to get here to coordinate? What do you want to learn? Somebody else?
Just to get an overview of the whole thing.
An overview, okay, that's a good one. We can do that in 3 hours. One more?
For what sponsored clinical trials is about.
Okay. I'm not sure that's in the scope of this topic, but I can certainly point you in the right direction. Okay.
The new electronic resources, is there new electronic resources?
There may be, but we're not covering it here. There's an EICF guideline. There's an e-consent guideline. Is that what you're talking about? There's one of those. Which I can point you to. Okay. No one wants to know tips and tricks on how to pass the exam.
How do you prepare? What's the best way to prepare?
That's what I'm hoping for. How do I prepare for this exam? Some of you have taken it pretty recently, and you all work in an academic institution, but how long, just raise your hand with a number, how long has it been since you took an exam where you had to, answer the questions and get a grade? How many years has it been? Like, mine's like this, right?
Long time.
A long time for a lot of us, so that's part of what we're going to talk about today. I think one of the strategies is to reduce test anxiety for this whole situation. So that's part of the goal. All right, so let's try to cover some of those. So today we did some introductions. I'd like to talk about advantages of certification, and I am president of the Northern California ACRP, so I'm focusing on ACRP, but SOCR is also an option, and I'm going to give you some comparisons there too. So there are advantages to certification no matter what kind of certification you choose to do. Another one would be RAPS, which is Regulatory Affairs Professional Society. So some of you in quality or regulatory affairs, that exam is like crazy hard. So my husband, who is a PhD, has been in the business for umpteen years, studied for 6 months, and got 76%, and 75% is passing on the RAPS exam. He was sweating bullets. So I'm just saying there are options, but we're not talking about RAPS exam today. So I'm going to cover the topics on the ACRP exam, And the resources for you, they call it a detailed content outline. We're gonna talk about the types of questions. There are 3 main types of questions. We're gonna practice some questions today, you're gonna write some questions today, and we're gonna review the guidelines and the declaration, and then I'm gonna give you some tips. So if you have tips to share, that's also a good opportunity to do that. So first of all, advantages of any kind of certification. So how many people in this room are currently certified in something except like, well, anything, certified in anything? Like, are you certified nurse, are you certified ACRP? Raise your hand high. How many of you are certified in anything? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So a third of you are certified, okay? I would encourage you to become certified in this field if you plan to stay more than 5 years in the field of whatever you're doing, because it does establish credibility. And in our world today, there's a lot of competition, and I think anyone who has more credentials is better, and you are in an academic institution where that's highly valued, so I would encourage this kind of thing if it fits your career path. So it does establish credibility, and I think it improves your career advancement opportunity. So for instance, someone asked about sponsored clinical trials, and I work a lot in the sponsor side, and many, many sponsors are now requiring certification before they hire someone in at a CRA level, which is our side of the CRC picture. So clinical research associate or higher, clinical trial manager or higher, they're requiring certification. And if it's not in clinical, they require project management certification. And if it's in regulatory, they require regulatory certification. So it's becoming pretty standard. It does enhance your skills and knowledge because you are required to study for it. Isabel studied for it. Did it increase your knowledge?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you have to sort of dig in and learn things, right? Okay. And in order to keep up your certification, you have to go to educational classes and keep it up. So for instance, Isabel is getting 3 CEUs for being here today, and she's hopefully gonna learn something. So it forces you to continue to learn. And it demonstrates engagement in a professional organization because whatever you're certified in has a professional organization. I also believe it strengthens your professional image, and you want to put this on your resume. So once you are ACRP certified, SOCR certified, RAP certified, update your resume, put it on. You can ask for more money.
Sorry if you're gonna get to this, but one of my questions is, I know ACRP now has the certification in research professional. So one of the
Yes.
things I've been, looking at is, do I do the certification for CRC, or is it better? What is the advantage of doing research professional?
Okay, I can talk about that. Why don't I just talk about that right now? It's a little complicated, but let me see if I can get through this. So there's CCRC. This is ACRP. There's also SOCRA. CCRP is CCRA. RP, research professional RP?
I think it's
CCRP.
CCRP, yes.
CRP, yeah, right, that's right. Okay, so this is a coordinator, a CRA, a PI, a research professional, okay? I'll talk about that in a minute. And this is CCRP. CCRP also, right? Okay, that's why I was confused, okay. And then there's a MAGI one also, which I think is CCRP also. It's a less known, but it's another way to get certified. So one thought for some people is, if I get SOCRA certified, I'm a research professional, I can continue in academia, I could go work for a CRO, I could go work for a sponsor, I'm a research professional, I don't ever have to re-certify myself. Here, you're saying, I'm working as a coordinator, I'm working as a CRA monitor, I'm working as a PI. They just added this one. But their thought, from what I'm hearing from corporate, is this doesn't equal this.
Does not?
Not really. This is for research professionals like me I'm not doing coordinator work and I'm not doing monitor work. I'm training, I'm doing, I'm running studies, I'm doing that kind of thing. So it doesn't make any sense for me to be a CCRA, and before that was my only choice, and that I am certified as a CCRA. But if I'm not doing monitoring or coordinator work, where do I fall in the bucket? So I would say you certainly can, if you are qualified to take this. They have their qualification list. Have you looked through that?
I did, but months ago,
Okay, so I would say one of the things we are gonna talk about is before you sit for one of these exams, you have to be eligible. And one of the eligibility criteria is 2 years of experience or equivalent, and they've got some equivalencies things. So I don't have off the top of my head what they require for this eligibility. So that may affect whether you can take it or not. But in any case, you could take this one if you wanted that. What, is your role a coordinator now, or are you doing monitoring?
yes, but I just didn't know, where career paths take you, so especially if you were going, on the opposite side,
Right,
if it's just
right.
better to have the RP.
Right, and that could well be. So it's new, and I'm not quite sure what the eligibility criteria are. I do know that you can take these now, no matter what your role is. So does that help?
Yes, thank
Sort
you.
of the answer is I don't really know, but that gives you a list, okay? Okay, great. Okay, let's walk through some of these then. So here's just a real quick comparison. I didn't do Magi because I wouldn't do Magi if I were you, so anyway, I didn't do Magi. So here, everyone used to say, oh, Socra's easier and cheaper. I think it may be easier. I don't know. Isabel, you took both of them. I haven't taken Socra. No, are you Socra?
Mm-hmm, I'm both.
Okay, do you want to say which is easier?
I think it depends on the person, and I think it depends on what you do
The
every
skill
day.
set. Okay.
ACRP again, I felt like it was more situational
It is,
based
yes.
questions like, oh, this happens, who's the first person you notify? Things like that.
Yeah.
Or like,
Yeah.
what's the first thing that would be done? And
Right.
for SOCRA, I felt it was very much regulation based.
Rote
like,
memory, yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
who are the 3 people that do this? Or,
Yeah.
what is
how
the
many members of the IRB?
Yeah,
That's
like
kind
what
of-
is the responsibility of this person? But I did hear
this one back in the corner.
that SOCRA has now shifted a little bit more towards ACRB because I feel it was it's a better way to get your actual ability, clinical knowledge of how you perform in your job.
Okay, so so here I have facts. I can't quantify which is easier or harder, but here are the facts. So basically, I did the numbers for us. So in order to be, you need to send in an application for eligibility for ACRP, and I do not believe you do for SOCRA. And this is non-refundable, so it's like, you better be pretty qualified, or you're gonna lose your $135 if they say, no, sorry, you're not eligible. They won't give you your money back. And then SOCRA has a computer testing fee of $115, which means you can take it at a computer center, or if you don't want to spend $115, you have to drive to a place on the day that they're giving it. Where did you go for yours?
I took it in a hotel in San Francisco.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a little difference there. All ACRP exams are computer at a testing center within a period of time. So you have to drive to the center, but they're like 100 centers in the Bay Area. So, the application fee is $300 for this, $395 for this, but you've already spent $135 here. And recertification every 2 years for $225, every 3 years for $350. So it's like, okay, let's do the math. So after 6 years, ACRP would have cost you $675 for recertification, and so it would have cost you $750 for recertification.
I just
if I did the
paid.
numbers right. Yes.
Yeah, I just paid. The $395 is for members. Non-members is $450.
Yes, that's true. This is all members. Yes, that's right. So then you have to be a member first.
And the fee for, retaking the exam is less than that. But yeah, so that's
I
a
think
little
this
bit
is a
more.
members, all of them are
Yeah.
members, member fees, right? Okay.
There
yeah.
is an eligibility application for SOCRA. They have to accept you. They don't charge for that, but they have to accept that.
Okay, okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so this is just sort of some facts, and this is in your handout, so you can go back and look at the facts.
Can I say one thing about this?
Yeah,
Just,
yeah.
I mean, it's expensive, right? We look at this and go, wow, this is kind of pricey. But you can use your staff funds for some of this, for continuing education, and certifications. Isabel, have you done that?
So we were told that we couldn't use it
Yeah.
for certifications. I did mine, I did mine through other organizations, that did pay for it.
Oh,
And that's why I got
not
both
through
of them,
Stanford.
because every time someone would offer, that they would pay for it, I'd just be like, okay, I'll take it.
Okay, so I thought you could.
But I
but
think
that
that might be changing now.
I think it might be changing.
And I think they'll pay for it if you pass it, but
Yeah,
not if
yes,
you don't
yes,
pass
yes.
it.
And then there's other, work with your managers, or if managers have divisional education funds that they will provide. I mean, ask, don't think that you have to do all of this by yourself out of pocket. So in SCCR, we have, for eligible, employees, there's funds that we can use, every year. So just something to think about and ask, and don't think that you have to pay out of pocket for all of
And when
this.
you do become a member, they offer you other things as well, like, cause you have to have a certain amount of hours to stay certified and everything, but they'll offer that. And if you're a nurse, it helps a lot too, because some of their things can be acceptable for nursing.
That's right,
Right.
that's right. So for instance, this class, you could use for your nursing license, hours. You could also use it for ACRP. So it's BRN contact hours, so. Okay, so this just gives you a big overview, but thanks, Kara, for
Yeah.
saying about the specific Stanford here. So basically for ACRP, you need to determine if you're eligible by looking at their criteria and apply. And then you have to get eligibility confirmation. And then you can complete the exam application. So these are the steps, and it's kind of confusing sometimes, so that's why I've listed the steps. And then you're going to study, right? And you have to schedule your exam and then take the exam. You can't just walk in, so there's another step you have to do. And then you have to keep up your certification. So think about the long term, because it's not a lot of good for you to do it, and then 2 years later, you haven't kept it up. And then you have to take the test again. Don't do that. Okay, and here are some options. There's probably more than I've listed here, but some options for then maintaining your certification in whatever you choose to certify in. Workshops like this one that offers CEUs. Also, the Northern California chapter meetings, where we have educational meetings, we offer one CEU, and the cost is $5.
For
So,
members.
per person.
For members.
For members, yes, for members. So there's a really inexpensive way to get another unit, if you had to pay for it yourself. Also, the Clinical Researcher magazine, which looks like this, which is now not a hard copy anymore, it's online only, but it looks like this. Has home study, self-study articles every month. And you can take that and pay and get CEUs for that. Also, I just went to the Global ACRP conference. This year was Washington, D.C. Next year is going to be Nashville. The year after that it's going to be Canada, I think, Toronto. And it's quite pricey, but you get a whole boatload of ACRP credits, so that's nice. And then ACRP and many other organizations offer CEUs for webinars. So you can take a webinar on your own time, either a scheduled webinar or on-demand webinar, and get CEUs for that. And then there's probably other ways to get CEUs here at Stanford. Kira, I mean, I'm sure you might want to mention just a couple of them that I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, any of the classes that I host, you get CEUs for, and any of the classes that Spectrum hosts, you can get CEUs for. So,
Yeah, so
kind of all classes that
attention.
CRC, any CRC would attend, you can get continuing education units for.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be that hard to keep it up if you keep remembering. That's the hard part. It's like, oh, I've got 2 years or I've got 3 years, but you really need to keep going, and then it's easy and practically free. All right, so for those of you who are going to take the exam, the ACRP exam, Kira mentioned she was gonna take it, so the window is September 10th through October 8th. So it's basically a month in the fall, and there's a month in the spring. And there are early bird rates, I'm not gonna go through all these, but if you want to apply for the exam and you get all those hurdles like eligibility and all that, then you get an early bird rate up through June 15th. So I'm giving you a heads up here. If you wanna do the early bird, it's through June 15th. Regular is through August 17th in order to take the September 10th through October 8th exam. So that's in your notes. All right, so the topics that are covered on the ACRP exam, sometimes people are confused about that, and I'm giving you a tip. This is what's covered. That's it. That's it. There are no regulations covered on the ACRP exam. And the reason for that is it's an international organization with international perspectives, and they use international guidelines only. So there's your tip. So we're going to go through E2A, E6, E8, E9, and E11. E11 is a newer one that they've just added this year or last year to the exam. They also provide you a detailed content outline, which is in the exam handbook. The exam handbook looks like this. I printed it out just to show you. So it's thick. I wouldn't suggest printing it out, but you might want to. So there's a CRC, Certification Handbook, CRA one, and there's a CPI one. And in the handbook, it talks about exactly what's on the exam, and they talk about the areas that are covered. So safety, trial management, trial oversight, everything about a protocol, and everything about IP are all covered on the exam. And I'm sorry, it fell off the bottom, but the website is acrp.net. I think it's on your slides, but it's acrp.net. So you can see, this isn't so helpful because, well, okay, it covers safety. Well, that's a pretty big topic. So we're gonna go in a little bit more detail on what that translates to. And here are the content areas with the percentages. This is what they're aiming to do, is cover about 12% talks about scientific concepts and design, 20% ethical considerations, 10% product development, 25% on clinical trial operations, good clinical practices. So this is kind of what you do every day. Site and study management, 23%. So there's so that's like 50% right here are these three topics. And then data management is about 10%. So it gives you an idea of what to focus on, knowing the content areas and about the percentage of the questions. There are 125 questions, and you have 3 hours. How many minutes is that per question? About
1.5.
20 minutes per question? No, 1.5, right. It's about a minute per question. So that also is helping you when you're thinking about test anxiety. Think about that. And we're gonna actually go through some practice questions today to give you kind of a feel for it. So there are only, I don't know if you need to know this, but there are 100 questions that are used to grade you. And there are 25 questions that they are testing, or they're like, they're seeing if anybody gets the right answer on these questions. So, but you don't know which is which. So, but anyway, there are only 100 questions that they grade you on. And there's 3 levels of questions. So there's recall questions, application questions, and analysis questions. And I'm going to describe those to you and kind of run through what those are. It's sort of obvious. Recall is rote memorization. Application is how do you apply the regs, and analysis is kind of what Isabel was saying, well, what would you do if this happened and that happened, this happened and that happened, then what would you do? So you're going to analyze the situation. So I'll tell you more about the computerized test in a little bit later. So just to get us all jump started, and whether or not you're going to take the exam or not, and no one's gonna grade you on this except you, I'm gonna pass out some practice questions. So take one and pass it along, and turn it over, because I'm gonna give you, this is like we're gonna give you 10 minutes, okay? So just turn it over, and then I'm gonna give you 10 minutes, and you guys can see how smart you are. Okay, yeah, this is like, yeah. I figure we might as well get the morning started, right? Okay, take one and turn it over, and get a pen ready, and pretend you're a student. Turn it over, please. Don't start the test yet, ma'am. Thank you. Okay. And if you don't want to take it, you don't have to. It's up to you. Has everybody got one? Okay, I'm going to start my timer. Go. 10 minutes.
Does anybody have any extra glasses? It's okay, I have another.
have 4 minutes. Pencils down. Okay, so this was an exercise to start your morning off. First of all, I'll tell you the answers in just a minute. First of all, did everyone sign my yellow paper? I didn't quite get enough count. Okay,
Oh,
you didn't
there's
sign
yellow
my.
paper.
Oh, there's another one there. Oh, okay.
This is BRN contact
Yeah,
numbers.
yes, okay, there's another one. That maybe makes me count better. So everyone needs to sign my yellow page.
Everyone signs this.
Yes, please.
So you could-
I need to keep track of who's in my class, irrespective of what you use with it.
So like
Yeah.
that BRNs and
It is.
CU, even if you're not, that's fine. Do they have to?
No, you don't have to put your license on there, you just put your name, that you came, so that at some point, if the BRN police come and ask me, this person claimed that they took a class from you in 2015, Did you give a class and did they attend? And I can pull out my document and say yes. Okay, okay, great. Okay.
Oh, this is Ross. Somebody else.
Yeah, does everybody else, did you sign the roster too? Okay. Everybody has to sign Kira's and everybody has to sign this. Okay. All right, so before I give you the answers, here's a blue worksheet. For those of you who are taking the exam, I provided you with sort of a worksheet so you can start thinking about things. And I have a box here for lessons learned. So, what did you learn about the practice exam that I gave you today?
You should study.
Okay.
There's a lot on here that I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. And I tried, these were not supposed to be super tricky. I tried to make it realistic. Okay, so study. We kind of know that. What else did you learn? I gave you 10 minutes for 11 questions. Leslie?
Time limitation, I skipped the first one, went right on to the other ones. And came
Okay,
back.
right. So you need to think about timing. Because there may be questions you're never gonna get, okay? So you don't wanna spend 20 minutes on them if you're never gonna get them. So just move on. Okay, what else did you learn? Yes?
Important details in the question?
Yes, read the question. My tip is to read the question twice before you start looking at the answers. Okay, another tip, anybody else learn something from this? They're like, oh yeah, that's how we take tests.
Take a deep breath, because I found myself going, oh my god, I haven't done this in years. This is really, there's a lot of anxiety here.
Yeah, read.
My God, I haven't done this much math and I don't even know how long.
Can you bring a calculator?
Yes.
You can.
No, you can't bring anything, but they provide you with a calculator on the computer.
Oh, okay.
Just real briefly, so the testing environment for the ACRP exam is like TSA on steroids, okay? TSA on steroids, because you're going to a testing center where they're testing everybody for everything. Guys in the other room are taking plumbing exams or whatever, it's like everything, testing on every last thing. So they're a testing center. They don't care about what you know or what you learned or whatever. So basically you go in, they make you put everything in a locker, and they make you turn your pockets inside out, and they wand you, and they make you take off your shoes.
And they take a picture of you.
And they take a picture of you, and they fingerprint you, and whatever, and they do all this stuff to you. And then you go into this room, and when you sit down at the computer, it starts, and it's 3 hours, and if you have to leave for some reason, the 3 hours the clock does not stop for you to go to the bathroom or get a candy bar. So be prepared. So, and you are only allowed, I think they give you a pencil and 3 pieces of white paper or something. Isabel, correct me if I'm wrong, if this is different from what you, and then, so you can do some notes taking for yourself, but it's on their paper, and there's a calculator and a clock on the computer.
They take everything from you
They take
every
everything
time
from
you
you.
leave,
Yeah.
and then you have to come back.
No phones. Oh, no phones. And if your phone is ringing in your locker, then everyone's really upset.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even bring it into I would just literally go in there with an ID.
I'm asking this because soccer does not provide lockers.
Well, so soccer I took on paper, so.
Paper, this is the $115 for the computer thing, so I don't know about the soccer as much.
I mean.
In a testing room with a proctor,
Yeah, exactly,
basically.
there's a proctor, I mean, you're allowed to have your bag and stuff next to you, but there's someone
Walking
around the
around.
whole time, you're not allowed to have your phone out for soccer. Yeah, I don't think you're allowed to have your phone out ever, for any test ever.
I'm concerned is where I'm gonna leave my phone, my wallet. They say we don't provide lockers, but you're not allowed to bring anything in, so where do I leave my stuff?
For soccer, for the written one, I don't know if you're taking it on computer?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have anything about that one.
I don't know the answer. Put
I'm sure
something
about-
in your pocket and leave it in the, I don't know. I don't know the answer, sorry, don't know the answer. Okay, so,
They should tell you.
you can probably find out from somebody if you're taking it on in a computer situation. I think it's probably in a computer testing facility, so it's
It
probably
is,
like
but they
this.
don't provide lockers,
I took ACRP many years ago, but you couldn't bring anything in, I just locked it in the trunk of my car. I mean, you just walked in with your ID and
Your car keys.
Yeah.
Put them somewhere. Okay, Okay, so I gave you calculations because there are calculations on the test, quite a bit of them. I'll tell you how much in a minute. So I'm gonna run through the answers. I'm just gonna have you circle the answers, and if we have time later, we could talk about why that's the right answer. But I'll just quickly give you the answers. So for number 1, the answer is B. I'm gonna go quickly, so 2A, 3C, 4C, like in cat, 5D, like in dog, 6A, 7D, like in dog, 8C, like in cat, which translates to number 3. A, B, and D are, excuse me. Question 8, A, B, and D are correct. C is the one that is not correct.
Question 7, only D is correct.
Yes. 9, B is in boy, 10, B is in boy, and 11, D is in dog. Okay, so we can go back and talk more about it later. I want to get on to the summarizing the guidelines and answering some of your questions. Okay, so I'm hoping that these questions kind of sparked your interest. If you're not taking the exam, then maybe you can help somebody else who is taking the exam, whatever. So there are 3 kinds of questions on the exam. There's recall questions, which is really rote memorization questions, quick to answer. What is an example of a rote memorization question in the ones that I gave you? You have one? Can you pull one out quickly? Yeah, so of the ones that I gave you, there are a couple of rote memorization questions. I'll give you some examples if you can rote. So they're really quick to, they should be quick to answer because you're gonna study and you're gonna memorize things. My tip here would be if there's anywhere in the guidelines or the declaration where there's a number, like how many members of an IRB should there be, that kind of thing, and there's a number, then memorize it. If there's a list, like what qualifies for a serious adverse event, there's a list, memorize it. So there are some things you're just gonna have to memorize. Those are recall questions. So here's an example, E11. E11 provides which category for term newborn infants? They've defined categories for children in E11, and one of them is full-term newborn infants. Which is the right answer? Does anybody happen to know? This is a really dumb definition, but it's in there, and that's why I pulled it out.
It's B.
It's A. It's like, okay, sure, 27 days. That's logical.
Really stupid.
It's not like a full week or a full month. It's 27 days, okay? So I'm like, okay. So you'd have to memorize that, right? So memorize it. I don't know if they're going to ask you this question, but I'm just saying there is an example of a memorization recall question from E11. Boom. Okay. All right. Another example is things that you're going to have to memorize material. So here's another question. Which entity should ensure accuracy, completeness, and timeliness of the data reported to the sponsor? And here I've given you the reference just in case you want to look it up later. So think about it a minute. Which entity? To make sure that the data we give to the sponsor are correct. What's the answer? Go ahead, shout it out. If you're wrong, that's okay. You would say C?
D? I would say D.
Who trumps who in the world of sponsored clinical trials? Yeah, basically it's the investigator, okay? The monitor checks, the coordinator checks to make sure it's right, but who signs the 1572 form? Who gets the money? That's the answer, okay. All right, so this is an example again of, you need to think about what the guidelines are saying, not sort of what do I do during my day. I ensure that the data are accurate, You know, LV ensures the data are accurate, right? The monitor ensures that they're complete, maybe. And IRB can make sure that it's safe. But who's the entity that is responsible? The guidelines are gonna say it's the investigator. So that's the kind of thing that, and you know, I quoted it exactly from this part of E6. All right, so the next kind of question that they ask you are application questions. So this involves some interpretation. It involves some classification. It involves translation of information, recognition of elements. You might have to interpret graphs and perform calculations. I didn't give you a graph in your test questions, but there were a number of graphs and charts and tables that you had to look at and analyze. But there are lots of calculations involved. So here's an example of a calculation. So let's go through this together, just so we can kind of run through it. So a subject is required to take 3 capsules of investigational product a day. They give you the times. This is what somebody said, look at the question and really read it through. So the times you have to take this IP is 7 a.m., 1 p.m., and 7 p.m. You get 25 capsules. The coordinator instructs the subject to start taking the IP that evening and return to the clinic at 10 o'clock in 7 days. So how many capsules should the subject return? We can think about it a minute, but let's play with it together. Okay, so let's say the subject comes in on a Monday. There's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and the subject comes back on Monday. So how many tablets did the subject take on Monday? 1, right? 1. How many did they take on Tuesday?
3.
Okay, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they took 3. How many did they take the day they returned to the clinic?
1.
1, because they returned at 10 a.m., they were supposed to take one at 7 a.m., right? 1. Okay, so now you quickly do the math. 4, 5, 6 times 3 is 18, 19, 20. They took 20 capsules, they had 25 in the bottle. How many did they have left? 5. Okay, all right. So it's a story problem, and you have to do however you're going to go through your calculations. You know, most of you can probably just think in your head, okay, yeah, no, they're going to take 20.
If you counted Monday as one of the 7 days, otherwise you might think it would be the next 7 days.
But what does the question say?
Each day is 7 days.
It says the coordinator instructs the subject to take the IP that evening.
On return.
Okay, here's the bottle, take it this evening. It's already after 1 p.m. I'm instructing you to take it that evening, right? So that's why it's not ambiguous. The answer is 5. Okay, so that's the kind of application question. So that's not a very hard one. I gave you a couple of harder ones on your practice, but this isn't a very hard one. This is just thinking, what are they asking?
Remember not to freak out.
Yeah, right.
Because that's what I was doing.
It's 5, I don't know, well, let's see. Okay, all right. And then there's another kind of question called an analysis question. So this involves some problem solving. So here again, you're gonna look for clues, and it often requires acting towards some resolution. So let me give you an example of that. So here's an analysis question. A subject is being considered as a candidate for a study, but does not meet one of the lab entry criteria. We've all been in that situation before. Well, what's the best action for the CRC to take? I want you to read through this, and in a minute, I'll ask you to tell me the right answer. let's talk about these. Okay, so let's just walk through them together. So, is this the right answer? Enroll the subject and repeat the labs in 1 week.
No.
All right, why not?
They don't meet eligibility.
Right, okay, so we know that's the wrong thing to do, okay? Is this the right answer? Refuse to enroll the individual and ask him to leave the clinic. Okay, why not?
Rude. Yeah.
Right, okay, but it's not against regulation, right?
But it's not the best action.
Right, it's not the best action, but it's not against regulation. So this is where it gets a little tricky, because you could know the regulations, and the regulations say you cannot enroll the patient if they don't meet eligibility criteria. And we're saying we're not gonna enroll the patient. So we're like, well, it could be the right answer, so, but this one is not. Okay, how about number C? Discuss the options for enrolling the subject with the PI while the subject is in the clinic. Okay, this looks possible, all right? What about this one? Enroll the subject and ask the sponsor to grant a waiver.
No.
Well, sponsors grant waivers all the time.
Doesn't meet eligibility.
Yeah, ask them before you.
Okay, all right. So this is where, this is a teaching moment. This is where I'm trying to explain that what gets us into trouble is we say, well, yeah, but I've had a situation where the subject didn't meet entry criteria and I did get a waiver from the sponsor and it was okay. So you get yourself a little bit into trouble if you overthink, or you do, well, what if? Like, and this one too. This is not wrong. This is rude, but it's not against regulation. This is possibly against regulation, but we have a workaround from it. So I'm trying to show you that some of these are like, well, what if this happened and what if that happened, and you get yourself into overthinking. So again, it's the best answer is this one. Of course, we need to figure it out while the patient's still there. What are we doing? Okay, does that help? Does that sort of help you think about these kind of analysis questions? All right, and let's see. Now, here's my favorite. Complex multiple choice questions. They can be any of these. Initially, they were my hardest kinds of questions. And it's question number, on your practice exam, I put my answer sheet, but anyway, on my practice exam, it's
Number 8.
Number 8, yeah, number 8. So it's number 8. So the trick there, though, is to answer each question individually. So here I've given Kira help here. I'm saying keep calm and answer the question. So here's what it looks like. You have all these answers to one question, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Like, there's too many different combinations for me to worry about here. So let's read this one. Which of the following are examples of vulnerable subjects according to ICG 6? Okay, so first of all, we look at this list, and then we look at this list, and we're like, okay, so how am I going to answer this? So the way to answer it is just to go through each question and say, is it true or false? So, are patients with incurable diseases vulnerable?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So then I can eliminate this one because it doesn't have A in it. Are refugees considered vulnerable subjects?
Yes.
Yes, okay, all right. Is there one in there that I can eliminate next?
Oh, no, not before.
Not
I
yet.
can eliminate this one because A is
Oh, A and D.
A and D only. So I can limit, so I'm down now to 50%, I have a 50% chance. Like, all right, are unmarried mothers vulnerable subjects?
No.
Not necessarily, right, it's not in the definition, right? It's kind of a category where we think about them as a little concerning maybe, or different, or vulnerable in some ways. Maybe they don't have support, but considering ICH, they're not. So C is not right. So but now dental students, are dental students considered vulnerable subjects?
Yeah, I think so. There's two.
Oh. Why would dental students be considered vulnerable subjects?
Well, medical students are listed
Yes.
in the ICH, so
Right.
you would think that dental would be considered like.
Okay. It turns out dental are also listed.
They might
Are they?
feel coerced.
Yes, yes, because they're in a subservient situation and could be considered vulnerable. So Karen just ran through a scenario in her mind. She knew that medical students were on that list, so probably dental students were too, but she wasn't exactly sure. So she was down to here. So it could have been just these two, or it could have been these three. So then you have to make a decision. And if you make an educated decision, at least you have a 50% chance of being right instead of a 25% chance of being right. And there's gonna be a situation where you're like, I just don't know. I don't remember whether dental students are or not, and so I better err on the side of caution and not an answer only A or B, but you have a 50% chance of being right. So don't let this part of the question fool you. Just go through it and say, true, true, false, true, and then answer the question, okay? So that's how you answer these complex multiple choice questions. They do take a little bit longer, I think, but once you get the hang of it, and once you practice some of them, you'll be fine.
So, excuse me, why are they considered vulnerable again?
Because they're in a subservient situation. They're in a situation where they could be coerced, or they could, just like medical students, it could be like, unless you participate in this, you're not passing medical school, you're not passing this class, or, your professor is gonna look poorly upon you, that kind of thing. And you could actually, if you're interested, look up vulnerable subject definition in ICH, and they do give a pretty good explanation. It's in section 1. All right, so which kind of question is going to be most difficult for you? And you might want to capture that on your little blue sheet. Do you have a hard time memorizing things? Are you going to have a hard time doing your calculations and interpreting graphs? Are you going to have a hard time with the analysis situations? Which is going to be the hardest for you? Just think about it a minute. You don't have to write it down, but this is, again, if you kind of know where your weak spots are, your gaps, then you can focus on those. My weak spot was the what ifs, because I've been in so many different companies in so many different situations over so many years when things changed. It was like, yeah, but we used to have waivers, and yeah, but I've seen them do this, and well, what if something happens with this? And so I kept running through all these things. Those were my hardest questions. It was just like, what do they want? What do they want? What are they looking for in the question? So that was my hardest one.
The questions where it says what is the best answer can be a little tricky.
That's the hardest for me. So, I'm just saying, figure out what's the hardest for you, and then practice those more if you're going to take the exam. Okay. Okay, these are the topics covered on the exam. I told you that a few minutes ago. And these are the titles of each of these guidelines. So the Declaration of Helsinki, we probably have all heard of, but we may not have read it for a while. The Principles of GCP that came out in the 60s. It had been revised repeatedly. ICH 2A is one where someone wanted to know safety management information. E2A is your go-to guideline for that. It is safety definitions and expedited reports. So it explains all the requirements for reporting on safety events, irrespective of what country you're looking at. So this is a good one, and we're going to look at it together in a minute. ICH E6 is good clinical practice. Is probably the one we're most familiar with, and it is packed with information. So it is a really big one to spend a lot of time on. E8 is kind of interesting. We don't usually look at it much, but it's just general considerations for clinical trials, and we'll take a look at it. I'll look at it to see what it has in it that you really should be focusing on. E9 is huge, and it's statistics. I was freaking out about that one. I was like, oh, man. But we'll look at it, and you can sort of see that there are some key areas that you probably want to read and have in the back of your mind, but they're not going to ask you statistical questions, but they are going to ask you about how statistics is used in clinical trial design and protocol development. And then E11, they just added in this last year or two. I'll bet you, Isabel, that you didn't have to do E11 because it's just in like, I think 2017 or just in the last year or two they added. I don't remember exactly what.
And this is the one where
This is
if it's
peds.
if it's offered in adults, it has to also be offered for pediatrics.
No, really. It's this is basically a guideline about how to develop medicines for peds.
Right, so because that's what they're saying. They're saying if you are examining it for a drug in an adult population, you can't deny that to the pediatric population. Most of the time, a lot of studies are adults only, but what they're saying is now you have to have these trials for children too, but opens a whole other can of worms.
It does, and that's why the guideline is helpful, and we'll talk about it too.
Mhm.
So, but it is covered on the exam, and it wasn't on the exam before, so they're expanding the exam to another guideline. All right, so when are we supposed to take a break here? I don't want to keep you guys crazy. Okay, 15 more minutes, I think. I set a break about 9. Okay, so let's open the Declaration of Helsinki. That was one of the requirements or requests, is that you bring a computer or you bring a copy. And if someone needs one, I have a couple booklets that have them. But let's open the Declaration of Helsinki. I have one copy anyway. I'm not sure it's. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so if you don't have the declaration up in front of you, maybe you can share with somebody nearby, and we're going to take a look at it. So because it is our foundation, I really want us to kind of walk through it and look at it so that we can see what it covers. How many pages is the Declaration of Helsinki? 8. Yeah, it's not that long. All right. So as you look at it,
Mine is only 4.
4? Well, it's 2-sided. 8 one side. I don't know.
Yours is, I think your font,
Your
for
font's
you guys
pretty
just
small,
much
too.
smaller.
So I think there are a couple of key sections, even though obviously you have to read the whole thing. But one of the key sections, I think, is this general principles. So what kinds of things are covered in this general principles and duties of physicians? What section is that?
3.
Okay, so take a look at the general principles a minute. And read me one or two of them. So Karen, read me one of them. What's one of the general principles?
It is the duty of the physician to promote and safeguard the health, well-being, and rights of patients, including those who are involved in medical research. The physician's knowledge and conscience are dedicated to the fulfillment of this duty.
Okay, so is that new information to
No.
anybody here? No, it's not. This is kind of what the declaration is. It's a list of what our duties and responsibilities are, but it's not really a new information. So I encourage you to go through it, maybe make some notes and list some of the things that you think are key as you go through the declaration, just so that you've had a chance to review it. It's focused on physicians because it's the physician's code of ethics, really. So it's focused on physicians. So let's look at the next section. There's a risks, burden, and benefits section. Where is that?
Next one.
Okay. Can you find that one? Can you guys, Catherine, did you find that one? Can you read one of those risks, maybe one of the risks? One that's not too long.
in medical practice and in medical, am I at the right place? And in medical research, most interventions.
Yes, yes, you're right.
Involve risks and burdens. Medical research involving human subjects may only be conducted if the importance of the objective outweighs the risks and burdens to the research subjects.
Okay, so read the last sentence about the outweighing the benefits, that one. Just read that section again.
Medical research involving human subjects may only be conducted if the importance of the objective outweighs the risks and burdens to the research subjects.
Okay, all right, so generally they're just saying we have to put the research subjects first, right? Which we know. So I would just walk through these and refresh your memory as to what it says in Declaration of Helsinki. There's also comments about vulnerable groups. It's not as extensive as ICH, but there's another section that talks about vulnerable groups and individuals should be carefully monitored. There's also a section, I believe, I don't have it, the right one in front of me. Is there a scientific requirements and research protocols?
Yeah, it's the next one.
Okay, all right. Leslie, do you have that in front of you? Can you just read one of them there? One of the bullets that's not too long?
Okay. Medical research involving human subjects must conform to generally accepted scientific principles, be based on a thorough knowledge of the scientific literature, other relevant sources of information, and adequate laboratory and, as appropriate, animal experimentation. The welfare of animals used for research must be respected.
Okay, all right. So that kind of a paragraph is going to directly link you to E8. So that's the other thing that I would encourage you to do when you're looking at risks and benefits or safety. I said that vulnerable groups, you could link this in your mind, then you can find the definition for vulnerable in ICH E6 and link that for your study. You can look at the scientific requirements of a research protocol. You're going to link that to E8 because we're going to talk about, that's the guideline that talks about how to design protocols that are correct. And I mean, that's simple. That's a simplistic example, but there are going to be other examples. Probably all of these could be linked to ICH E6 because E6 covers everything. But you might want to specifically make notes to yourself to, for instance, okay, where is vulnerable subjects listed in declaration and where is it, it's in section 1.73 in ICH G6, wherever it is. No, you do not have to know those numbers.
Okay.
But what I'm saying to you is, using this as a foundation, it says, oh, we have to be careful for vulnerable subjects. But I need to know more than that. I need to know what is the definition of a vulnerable subject. Where is that? And what does it say? Because Karen knew almost the definition, but she hadn't memorized the definition of vulnerable subjects, so she couldn't really answer the question I asked. So we want to make sure everything that you need to know you've studied and you've memorized. So now Karen does know the definition of vulnerable subjects, and she knows where to find the definition of vulnerable subjects. That's why I'm trying to show you how to link the two together. All right, research ethics committees. Where's that section in declaration? Who wants to find out for us? Lauren, have you found it?
Yep.
Okay, you want to read one of the bullets?
Sure.
Thanks.
These are both long ones.
Yeah, don't read them. Are they too long? Are they all long?
They're pretty
Yeah,
long.
they're all
Okay,
long.
all right, okay. Okay, so what section is there a number for that?
Starts with 23.
23, okay, okay, so there's a section on research ethics committees, all right. What section of ICH is going to be your link, ICH E6, is going to be your link for IRBs and ethics committees? Does anybody know? Look it up. Okay, we're going to find it, all right? So there's a whole section of ICH E6 that talks about what the requirements are for IRBs and ethics committees. So this one tells you sort of the bottom line, and then E6 tells you all the details. What are the roles and responsibilities of the ethics committee? Who can be on it? What are they supposed to do? What are the documents that they have to provide? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? All right. Thanks, Lauren. All right. Privacy and confidentiality. Who's got that? You guys don't even have it open. You want to be, oh, you've got a copy here. Oh, good, good, good. Okay. Oh, good. Well, why don't you read us privacy and confidentiality? That's easy.
Every precaution must be taken to protect the privacy of research subjects and the confidentiality of their personal information.
Okay. All right. So that's pretty vague, right? but it's our baseline. Where else would we find information on privacy and confidentiality? What other guideline would we look at?
E6.
E6 is the answer, is the answer. But you may want to make a note of the details of it. When should it be redacted? When does it not have to be redacted? Who can see privacy information, who cannot, et cetera, et cetera. Because we know that if FDA comes in and does an audit, they see all patients' privacy and confidentiality. So it's not like nobody gets to see it. So now we need to know who gets to see it. Okay, all right, so the current version that they're using is 2013, I'm pretty sure. So they will tell you on the website, but I'm pretty sure that's the version. Okay, this is the brief overview of the Declaration of Helsinki, and you can see it's not a very long document, and it's not a very complex document. It's your foundation. It's where I would start and make connections from that. There's also a section that I think is pretty important on informed consent and use of placebo. That has been pretty controversial, use of placebo. So is there a section on, can we find the use of placebo paragraph?
33.
Okay, Karen, you want to read that quickly?
It's long.
Oh, it's very long, okay. All right, we'll read it then. All right, is there informed consent one above that?
Yeah.
Yes, 25.
25, all right. Read that one, that's not too long, please.
Okay. Participation by individuals capable of giving informed consent as subjects in medical research must be voluntary. Although it may be appropriate to consult family members or community leaders, no individual capable of giving informed consent may be enrolled in a research study unless he or she freely agrees.
Okay, all right, so that's kind of what we already know. One of the things that I found about consent in there was legally authorized representative and legally
acceptable.
Why legally
is there a
acceptable
difference?
representative.
Why is it different between ICH and
I don't know.
everywhere else?
I don't know, but it's not consistent between declaration and ICH. That's another thing.
That's
So-
a question for the exam. They keep asking that.
Well, you need to know, well, first you need to know what this is, but then you need to know who uses authorized and who uses acceptable. What declaration says versus what ICH says. That's a little bit of disconnect. So I just talked to you about connecting the dots. There's a disconnect for the dots, and you may find some others. It doesn't really mean different things, but it's different language, so don't get thrown off. There's another. Okay. There's also a section on post-trial provisions, a section on research, registration, and publication and dissemination of the results. This was recently updated in the 2013 one because both EU and US now has the database, clinicaltrials.gov in the US, UDRACT in the EU, for dissemination of results. And so that was updated in declaration. And there's another section about unproven interventions in clinical research. What number is that one? Can anybody find that one for us?
37.
37, okay. Is that one long?
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so just pointing you to it again, there's that issue is something that you need to read through and know what the perspective is, all right? So that's a summary of Declaration of Helsinki. Any questions or comments on Declaration? It's your foundation, so start with that and make your connections from there. Okay, we're gonna take let's try a 10-minute break, come back in 20 minutes till, and we're gonna go through the other guidelines then. Thank you, I'm picking on you, Karen.
No, that's right. Please do.
I know you'll cooperate.
No, I wasn't, in my mind, I have to be sharp.
You will.
Sam and I were supposed to take your research monitoring class last year. Are you planning on doing that like here or somewhere in the area?
Kira may know that, I don't know, are we planning, do you think risk-based monitoring is on the agenda again this year, or is it someone else in your group doing that?
No, we have a recording.
Oh, you do?
Send you a link to it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I had asked that. Are you
We don't-
recording of somebody
I
else?
think you
Somebody
sent
else.
us the slide. I think you might have sent us the slide. Because we were, the last minute we couldn't come because we were in SU. So I think you had sent us the
So it's,
slide.
yeah, we don't have you recorded.
No, you don't have
We might have another speaker recorded from another risk-based monitoring.
Another option, there are quite a few webinars on ACRP.
Oh, really?
And so, I mean, that's gonna cost a little money, but, if you got several people together, you know, even 5 people, it wouldn't be very expensive. I don't think they're maybe $99 or something. And if you want to look it up, I can show you, if you want to right now during the break, I can give you, point you to what might be valuable, or you might wanna send Kira, like, we found 3 different webinars, which one would you think I should take? You know, that's another idea.
Okay.
I think that might help you, because I'm not
Okay.
planning to do it anytime soon.
Okay.
The only thing I would say is, are you monitoring?
Yeah, so we're struggling,
Oh, okay.
we have, so we do both monitoring and auditing depending on if we're doing our quality assurance or the DSMC activities.
Yeah.
And we're trying to come up with a monitoring plan, Sammy's kind of spearheading it, but we're kind of struggling with how to do it.
Okay, okay. Well, I can give you my card, you can give me an email if you have a question. I also think there's probably some resources for you, either with
Send me an
Kira
email.
or
I
Spectra.
can look through my content and see if we have a recording at least.
And some guidelines, you know, someone might be able to, like Peg, or I don't know who would be the
Yeah.
person anymore, to walk them through pointing them in the right direction.
Yeah, I think
Where
I
to
have
stand
some
with
resources, and then there's
no.
I'm pretty sure, but not positive, that we have a recording of a previous training.
Okay.
Just email me.
Okay, that'd be great. And I think we probably need to connect with Peg as well on some topics. We were talking to Jennifer last week about Kasper and wanting to kind of make sure we align with Spectrum, and probably risk-based monitoring, we need to do the same.
Yeah, I don't know if Spectrum has
street
done
or-
anything for risk-based monitoring yet. I mean, you know, Jennifer's working on all of this
Yeah,
SRPs
yeah,
and
yeah.
everything, but I
Everything's
don't think risk-based monitoring is in there. She hasn't done that one yet, but Kappa's maybe.
Yeah. Okay, all right.
I
Thank you
think
both.
the challenge with risk-based monitoring for your environment is not as many people do monitoring.
Right.
You know, so it's, and the other challenge is, even if you hit people across the head with it, the sponsors aren't doing risk-based.
I was just gonna say, you're not gonna see it.
You're
I
not
mean, we've
gonna
done
get
a
it.
couple
Nobody
things
wants-
and
nobody does it.
And nobody has been doing it. So it's, I mean, it's helpful. The class is great,
Yeah.
but then you get out into the world and you have monitors come and they're not doing it anyway. So it's like, well, I don't,
It's
why
kind of
get
like
trained on it?
the latest,
What?
like, word to throw around.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Just like electronic content. Everybody goes, oh, what, you can say, yay,
Yeah.
and then nobody does it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So,
But we wanted to just throw the words around. So
Well,
we knew
yes,
that.
that's what's coming.
No, that's
Right.
important.
I would
Yeah,
make
thank
sure
you
you
for-
go
yeah, you were-
online
you were
and
here.
get the handbooks. Yeah, and I'm gonna tell you some other, you should take their practice tests. You should get a study group together. You know, there are lots of other things that I think would be helpful. But I'm giving you like the in-depth review of what's covered on these. Yeah. Does that help?
She's the best. Sorry, I didn't call you back.
I think it's either 75 or 80%, something like that, 75 to 80.
I think it's 70. I think for ACRP, you had to get, there was like 100 and.
There were 100 questions.
Yeah, but is ACRP, is it adaptive?
I don't know.
Is it adaptive? I can't remember if it's adaptive or not, where it's like, you know, like if you answer questions and they give you like the hard ones, is it like that?
It could be, I don't think they penalize you for wrong answers, I know that.
I think what I took it was like
It's weighted, I don't know if it's weighted or not.
Yeah.
I think it's 100 questions and you have to get 70 or 80% of them, yeah.
Or above, okay, or like,
You just need to pass.
however, yeah, I think it might be curved. I think like a certain amount of, you know, like you have to be in the, over 70%, you know, like not in the, better than the 70s, yeah.
Are you on there?
I don't even know if he knows who I am.
It's not very clear about the questions. So let's see what, this is from Kaiser.
So who's it been, Kaiser?
Yes, and transfer to staff. So they said like, service of bread.
Okay.
And problem fraction.
Okay.
And then what they have here, it's not first one. I don't see, it's not here.
Sometimes you have to wait for the discharge, something like that.
Okay.
And who's in for admission?
Oh my God.
Sometimes it's admitted, right?
I just want to delete all of them, I don't even care.
So sometimes you have to kind of wait.
Okay.
Because you're, when they have really time of year, they're just. So what, and so you could, I mean, it could be that what caused the admission was, maybe it was more short term, he was wiped out of the team. But, for the, she didn't wait until after diagnosis. I don't know, what is your problem that you don't really know yet, right?
It's like anything that
Yeah,
is
you should- They cause
hospitalization.
hospitalization, yeah, yeah.
It's not,
So they haven't found any infection or anything?
The last time.
So that the
and they didn't see this one.
Oh, okay, okay. Oh, good, okay. So I would get the ER note from Kasper. Okay.
It's okay, it's so
You can see it in the care notes. Okay,
But I
okay.
don't know if she.
So, yeah, you should take away from.
So we're gonna.
But as long as the PI is documenting it, sounds like. This discharge. Does he have an
actually discuss like.
So then the other thing is that in my box is, to write.
Oh, right.
So like, we only hire for the first patient.
Yeah, but then.
I already, registered on alcohol, but I not registered as
Oh, do they have providers on their phone?
That she was told.
That's an error. Yeah. So every school.
Right, and then where else did she go?
Yeah, that's true.
That's
Okay. And actually, so we wanted to. And then so the case also check the MA. So just to make sure that you can go in there and say to the MA, but they're not going to make the patient tell them there's yeah.
what I don't know what our. But do you wanna maybe we compare, that's the difference.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what other are like, but it seems this is, get this job. Yeah, it's not like.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, for sure, I can get the job. When you're in like.
Yeah, try again.
That's what I get for the so I should ask for just under.
Just give it a go.
Yeah. It was the, if they don't pay for it, they never pay for the positions. But that's a good question to think of. Staff auditors to be certified, they would. And I also wrote down, when I first started, they had me in the, I can look for SQA. They're very close. They're very
Good.
helpful.
Happy to have you.
Just the qualification.
Is Jeanette Green here?
Yeah, but you should look at that too.
Lana Pate?
Yeah.
She's not, okay.
I just wanted to. No, give everybody the answer. Yeah, we'll go. That was interesting. Like, oh my God, I was gonna take the most test and it's probably one of my nursing boards. I know, I've been here. So funny. All right, so let's keep going. Thanks for coming back on time. All right, so let's talk about E2A. E2A. Is this something that you guys have read recently?
No.
I haven't either. So, except I did have a question about safety the other day, and I pulled it out of my back pocket, and somebody was quite impressed that I knew it was there. So there you go. See, credibility. Okay, so E2A is called Clinical Safety Data Management. Definitions and standards for expedited reporting. Who wanted to know about safety management in this room? Somebody wanted to know safety management. Good, everybody. Didn't somebody ask for that for the topic? Okay, here you go. All right. So again, we're going to, I've purpled, highlighted the things that I think are like the key things you need to pay attention to and know about. But I'm not saying don't read the whole thing. But here's the key. So there are definitions that are confusing. Here is a memorization exercise. You need to memorize all of these definitions. You need to memorize adverse drug reaction and know the difference between an AE and an ADR and a serious ADR and a SUSAR and all the rest of it. So this is an area where the definitions are critical and important and universally accepted. So definitions of an ADR. What's the difference between AE and an ADR, just real quickly?
Relatedness to the drug?
Relatedness, exactly. Adverse event is anything. Adverse drug reaction means related, or supposed, potentially related. A serious AE, and then you need to know the list of serious criteria. And these are not different from the regulations in the 312.32 in the U.S., but it's in ICH here. So the other thing, the third one is expectedness. So again, what's the expectedness of this adverse drug reaction? What's the purpose of expedited reporting? What documents do we need? And some examples of severity or specificity. So that's another, this is getting quite granular, but you need to understand the difference. So for instance, if it's just listed in the investigator's brochure, then it's expected. But if it's not listed at that severity or specificity, it's unexpected. So there's layers and layers of understanding ADRs. So this is a very, I would spend quite a bit of time on understanding definitions and from this guidance. So you guys have it open in front of you. So under 2, section 2, it's the basic terms and all the definitions under section 2. So there's quite a bit. I would point you specifically to section B, where it talks about serious adverse events, and it lists them. And I would point you to the fact that the definition in the middle of the page, under B, on my page 3 anyway, says a serious adverse event or experience or reaction is any untoward medical occurrence that at any dose results in death. So just because a patient dies in a study does not mean it's a serious adverse event, or serious adverse reaction. So make sure you read all the words involved in the definitions of these. So I'm just pointing to you. Memorize those 5 for sure. Be able to have them roll off your tongue. Okay. Another section here that's important are the standards. So section 3 is the standards. So what do we do with single cases? How do we deal with those? What are the timing for fatal or life-threatening? And what's the timing for other serious unexpected ADRs? And how do we deal with blinded cases, blinded therapy cases? And here I would connect the dots between this guidance and E8, because E8 talks about clinical trial design and blinding and double dummy studies and randomization and that kind of thing. So again, connecting your dots between this guidance and the E8 guidance that we haven't talked about yet. So quite important to memorize time frames and know exactly which time frame is used, and how to report them both in the US and ex-US. Because even if you're only using US studies, this is an international guidance, and there's information about what forms are used for that. So let's just stop a minute and look at managing blinded therapy cases. I think it's section D, 3, page 6 on mine. I don't know if yours is paginated in your digital version. Is it paginated?
It's page 6, sorry.
Okay, good, page 6, okay. So let's just stop a minute and look at this. Managing blinded therapy cases. I'm going to read a little piece of it, and then we can talk a little more about it. The middle of the paragraph says, although it is advantageous to retain the blind for all patients prior to final study analysis, when a serious adverse reaction is judged reportable on an expedited basis, it is recommended that the blind be broken, only for that specific patient by the sponsor, even if the investigator has not broken the blind. So here's information that tells you this could be one of our what-if scenarios or analysis situations. So you need to understand that they may ask you a question about breaking the blind. Patient, has a reaction that's a reportable event. Is it required that the investigator and the sponsor break the blind or know the therapy, for instance? And you know now that it's not. It's only required that the sponsor do. So this is the kind of thing where I would suggest you read through it, get a picture of what's in it, and then for certain situations you go back in and analyze and maybe even make up questions for yourself about these. And in a few minutes I'm going to pass out some cards, and we're going to work in pairs, and people can write down a few questions. So you're going to go back and look at some of these guidances and write down some questions so that you can think about it more. All right. And then then the next paragraph that I'm not gonna read says there are disadvantages to maintaining the blind under certain circumstances which outweigh the advantages. So there again, go through that and read what are the disadvantages of maintaining a blind? We think we're always gonna keep the blind in place, but there are some disadvantages. Okay, and then the last section is miscellaneous issues, which talks about reactions with active comparators or placebos. What do you deal with that? Products with more than one use, and some post-study events. Also in this one, did I put that in here? No. Okay, in E2A, also look at the last section, there's an attachment. Attachment 1, don't forget about attachments and appendices on each of these. So what's in attachment 1?
Key data elements for inclusion in expedited reports of serious adverse drug reactions.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's a really long title.
Okay, so what does that mean? I'm looking around somebody I haven't asked before. What is this attachment telling us we have to do?
Report quickly.
Quickly, but it also tells you you have to have certain elements for it to be a reportable event. You have to have an identified patient. You have to have the name of the product. You have to have an identified reporter. You have to have an event that fits the criteria, is a SUSAR. So it goes through the information, the minimum information required for expedited reporting purposes. And this again can get us into trouble because we think, oh, somebody had a problem, I don't know what drug they're on, I don't know who was treating them, I don't know anything, but I'm gonna send it in right now. Well, this is telling you, no, this is what you need to have in order for it to be, these are the key data elements for it to be included in expedited.
Well, up above it says the minimal information is
Minimum.
less than what's down below here.
Right, right, but it's telling you that there are some minimum requirements, and then these are some of the elements for the details. So I'm pointing this to you to say, this is again, if you looked at a CIOMS report or a MedWatch report, this is what's in there, but this is where they get the information they put on those CIOMS reports. And you can get a CIOMS report blank form or a MedWatch form online. I would encourage you to print one of those out, both of those out in your studying for this.
What did you call them?
A CIOMS?
Seance, I
Mhm. Look at the first paragraph.
Yeah.
CIOMS 1. Or a MedWatch report, which is what we use in the US. Because then you'll be able to kind of see what they're asking for and how people fill them out, if you don't do that on a regular basis. Okay, so that's the review of E2A. What's one thing you learned about E2A?
Important.
Yeah? Anybody learn anything about E2A?
Tells you what happens when things go wrong.
Things go wrong, all right. How many of you had read E2A before 9:30 today? Okay, well there you go. We're looking at important key guidelines. So the person who wanted to know about safety management, I think this is a really good go-to document, and then looking at your reporting forms is also very helpful. Okay, so I'm going to start by passing out these cards, and you're going to start to write down some questions. So jotting down a question or a section that you might want to go back and write a question about would be helpful. So I'm going to give you a color. Get 2 or 3 cards. So take, you guys take 2 cards each, all right? Just take 2 cards each. Go this way. Just take 2 cards each, and when you stop, that's fine. Take 2 cards each. I'll give you the leftovers. All right. 2 or 3, just not take 20. You won't need them all. Okay. All right. So in either Declaration of Helsinki or E2A, I want you to just kind of, you don't have to use, you can use this card or not, you're gonna pass this card around to somebody, or one of these cards around to somebody eventually. Jot down an area that you would want to ask a question about, write a question about. If I'm in a study group, I'm with you, you're providing me with a test question, think about what area of declaration or B2 you're gonna want to write a question about. Just maybe jot it down at the top. Let's say, I want to write a question about attachment 1 of B2A. So write it at the top, and then you're gonna go back. I'm gonna give you time later to write that question. Just think a minute about what area you think would be a good area to write a question about. Make yourself a little note. Give you 1 minute for that, and then we'll go on to the next. Am I clear? Am I clear about what you're doing? You're making yourself a note about where I'm going to go back and write a question. Okay, let's go on to E8. So pull up E8. You don't have it in front of you already. General considerations for clinical trials. This is kind of a, I think this is kind of an easy one. You need one easy one, because E9 is not easy. E8's easy. Okay, so E8. So first of all, the objectives of the document are what they talk about first. And I'm not going to read them all to you, but the objectives, they list 4 of them here. This document is intended to describe internationally acceptable principles and practices for the conduct of trials, facilitate the evaluation and acceptance of foreign clinical data by promoting a common understanding of principles, present an overview of ICH clinical and safety and efficacy documents, and provide a glossary of terms used in ICH clinical safety and efficacy related documents. So right there, you're saying, there's another glossary. Look at the back right away. Where's the glossary? Is there a glossary of terms? Is there a glossary of terms at the end? No. It's all in the document. This is the document that has the glossary of terms, so it's not a separate document. It's saying in this document there's terms. Okay, that's the trick. Does that make sense? So they're saying in this document we're providing you with terms. Okay, so there are 2 general principles of trial design. What are they? What's the first one? Someone who I haven't heard from.
Protection of clinical trial subjects.
Right, protection of clinical trial subjects, that's one of the principles, and what's the second one?
Scientific approach and design.
Right, okay, all right, so these are your 2 key principles of trial design. So it has to be protect the subjects, and it has to have a scientific approach, all right? And then in table 1, which is the next page, they tell you the different types of studies, the objective of the study, and some examples. What does that look like to you? What do these 4 boxes look like to you?
Phases.
Yes, it looks like phases. So it is phases. So human pharmacology studies are phase 1 studies, right? So it's a simple connection. They tell you the objective and they tell you some examples. So we know they're talking about phase 1 studies because the study examples are dose tolerance studies, single PK and PD studies, you know. So we know those are phase 1 studies. What's the second box?
Phase
2A and 2B.
Yeah, phase 2. Phase 2, because they're exploratory. So again, therapeutic exploratory means they're using they could be therapeutic, but they're exploring the targeted indication of the molecule. But they're using a term that we don't use every day. So I'm pointing this out to you. So if a question asks you which of these following is a therapeutic exploratory study, you need to translate in your mind phase 2. Bingo. Is it a phase 2 study? Yes or no? And on and on. The confirmatory makes sense because in phase 3 you're confirming what you explored in phase 2. So you're confirming that this product is safe and efficacious. And then phase 4 is therapeutic use. So therapeutic use, they say large, simple trials, pharmacoeconomic studies. Those are the type study examples. So we know that that's a phase 4 study. So this is another area that I think is a bit confusing. It's like legally authorized, legally acceptable representative is confusing, but we can get around it. This also is confusing, but as long as you think about what the words mean, you can figure out their meaning phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. So let's go on. They talk quite a bit about development methodology for clinical trials, for how to design a clinical trial, and considerations for the development plan. They talk a little bit about non-clinical studies, which we don't really deal with, most of us in this room. But then they talk about how to create a study and what the phases mean. And now they're using phases in the second part of the guideline, phases of clinical development. And they're talking about the quality of the products and how is it quality controlled and how do you know that what you're using is the same for all of it. They also talk about special considerations. Very special. 3.1.4 is special considerations. So I would have us look at what are some of these special considerations. A number of special circumstances and populations require consideration on their own when they are part of the development plan. And one of these is, what's the first one under there?
Studies of drug metabolites.
Right, what does that mean? What are studies of drug metabolites? What does that mean? Because you can have a molecule and you can have metabolites of that molecule, and we need to study how those metabolites what's the pharmacokinetics of those metabolites, all right? So we also need to do number 2, which is what? Second one. Drug-drug interactions. What does that mean? What's an example of a drug-drug interaction that you've used and had dealt with?
Synergy.
There's some synergy, or there's some conflict, or so that sometimes we want to know how patients are doing if they're taking a co-prescribed drug, and sometimes we exclude other concomitant medications from the trial, so because we're afraid of drug-drug interactions. So you need to understand what they're meaning by these terms of drug metabolites, drug-drug interactions, and then here's this third one. They're talking about special populations, and that can be a whole other study on its own, but what are some examples of special populations that we test for in clinical trials?
Pregnant women, children.
Yes, so either pediatric patients, or, what's the opposite?
Geriatric.
Geriatric patients, or patients with certain specific diseases, certain specific, niches of the population. It just depends on, what we're looking for. So we have to control for that or test for that in certain situations. So they're kind of, they're talking about, different kinds of study design and different kinds of considerations. So this is the whole idea of this number of 8, the E8. They're also talking about the kinds of blinding you need to do, the objectives for the protocols that you have. Look at what the objectives you have. They're talking about what objectives you need to have in the study. They're talking about areas of design for this trial and the conduct of the study. So let me see. So under 3.2.3, they're talking about the conduct of a study. What's a reference to another guideline in the conduct of the study here? What are they co-referencing? It's under 3.2.3.
ICH guideline.
Yeah, what are some of the ICH guidelines they're referring to there?
E2A and E2B.
Yeah, so we're seeing 6, 2A, 2B, which we're not discussing today. But here again, I'm trying to show you to connect the dots between this one and the others. And it's referring to the others right here in this one. Okay, so this is the kind of information that's covered in this particular guideline, and this one I think is fairly general. The key thing here is to know what they're talking about when they talk about therapeutic confirmatory and therapeutic exploratory. Okay, so this is something you need to read 2 or 3 times, memorize a little bit about, but it's not one of your hard guidelines, in my opinion. This is the example of the connections between phase 1 and therapeutic exploratory. Okay, any questions or comments about E8? So jot down one question or one area that you might want to go back and write a question about for this guideline. You're going to have some questions about it, so what would they ask you about E8? What are some areas that you want to write a question about? Let's go on to E9, which is statistics. How fat is that one? It's like 34 pages. It's pretty crazy. So let's pull up E9, and we're going to talk about statistics for 2 minutes. Hopefully not longer. Okay. So this one, again, I was pretty freaked out about E9 because I was like, what in the world are they going to ask us about this? Because they, I don't know statistics. So I would encourage you to take a look first at the table of contents. Just just look through the table of contents and see that it talks about trial content, what you're gonna have to think of first, the scope of the trials, the design, the considerations like parallel design and crossover design, that kind of thing. And that it, you know, it talks about data analysis considerations, which is something the biostatisticians usually do, and evaluation and reporting of the data. So this is a guidance that is probably pretty heavy for us in clinical trials, but we need to read it and we need to read it 2 or 3 times and capture what you think are some key areas. It would be my suggestion. I don't remember any questions, and Isabel, maybe you can remember. I don't remember any questions that I couldn't answer because I didn't understand E9.
I'm not a statistical person at all, and I don't.
Right, okay, so I would say don't freak out, but let's go through, go through kind of the key things so you do understand it. It kind of dovetails with E8. So they're talking about techniques to avoid bias. That's one of the things that we need to understand. And 2 of the techniques would be blinding and randomization, obviously, because if you're blinded, you can't have bias, and if it's randomized, that helps you not have bias, and that's part of the blinding. And you need to understand some of the terms that they're used for blinding. So what is the difference between single blind, double blind, and a double dummy situation? If you're not familiar with that, you need to read those sections and understand it. What are the common ways that we do randomization, and how, so what are the logistics and the common ways of doing it now? Probably most of you are using some kind of IWRS system of some sort, but there are codes that you break, that you scratch off and break at some point. What are the advantages and disadvantages of it, and how do you break codes when you need to? Sort of, that's a piece. All right, and then you do need to know these kinds of basic designs, statistical designs of trials. The difference between a parallel and a crossover design. What's a factorial? What's a multi-center study? How are you gonna, know the difference? So if someone gives you a story problem describing a study and then says, what kind of a design does this show you, you'll be able to answer the question. So there's also information on the types of comparisons that we do. So not every study is set up to be that A is better than B. Not every study is set up to be a superiority study. So what types of comparisons are we doing, and what are still acceptable in running trials? Because we can just show equivalence. We don't have to show superiority, for instance. And when we're using comparisons, when do we use active comparators and when do we use placebo comparators? When is it ethical to do that? When is it helpful to do that? When is it not ethical to do that? Another kinds of information about trial design is how do we do dose response trials? Those are often in phase 1, maybe phase 2. What is sequential design? What does that mean? And how do we determine sample size? So what do they say in E9 about sample size determination? One of the things that gets people in trouble a lot with investigator-sponsored trials is sample size. So what does that mean, and how do we determine it? So one other thing is trial considerations is that how are we supposed to monitor them? What do they say in E9, and how does that relate to E6? When and how do we do interim analyses? One point to remember is you can't just do an interim analysis because you decide you want to find out what the answer is in the middle of the study. You have to have stated that in the beginning. What do you do about amendments, protocol amendments? We've probably all lived through protocol amendments. How do those come about, and how do you deal with them, and what happens with an early stopping situation? When you have a data safety board that requires you to stop early, or you have a safety situation without a data safety board that requires you to stop early. So there's a lot of discussion about these kinds of topics in E9. And there's information about data analysis, evaluation of safety and tolerability, and how you report the results. And there's also a very helpful glossary. So here, let's look at the back. Point you to the glossary because there is a specific glossary in E9. What page does it start on?
32?
Yeah, on my book, it's 32, yes, page 32. So, for instance, here is a definition of bias that would help you. A couple more down, there's a definition of double dummy. You know, we're not gonna take time to explain all of these, but you know, if you don't really understand what a double dummy study is, or you've never done a double dummy situation, here's a definition. It would be a good question for you to ask your study partner, you know. Here's an example of a study design. What is it? Is it a crossover? Is it a double dummy? Is it a randomized controlled? You know, what is it? Intent to treat, that's another phrase we throw around. A lot of times people may not know that one. What's a non-inferiority trial? What is a superiority trial? What's a surrogate variable? Okay, there's a definition of a surrogate variable. So, a lot of these I would read over, and you may not have to memorize them specifically, but at least you know them. You've read them, you understand them. There are several that I would certainly memorize, like trial design specifics. So, and for those of you who aren't taking the exam, I'm pointing out E9 because it's a good reference for trial design. It's a good reference for glossaries and terms. All of these are references for you in conducting the clinical trials, and you may not have looked at them before, you may not have referred to them before. If you're working with you call them sponsor investigator research here, SIRs, is that right? Investigator sponsored trials, what do you call? PI initiated trials, what do you guys call those here? This is another good resource if you're in that situation where your PI is doing the trial. It's not a sponsored trial from an external sponsor, you're the sponsor. These are also good references and tools for you, so.
There's also another class that's being given in August by Spectrum that I help teach on phase of research and clinical trial designs. We have a biostatistician who comes and talks about clinical trial design, and a lot of these words that you just threw around are also mentioned in that class. And then I also talk about phases of research using the same terminology that's in this guidance.
Okay, great. So that would be like a.
Haven't attended that, then.
Yeah, that would be another help to help whether you're taking the exam or not. It sounds like a really good class, and if you're taking it, it's a good kind of refresher right before the September exams.
Yeah, I think it's, I'm pretty sure it's in August.
In August, there you go. Okay, great. So, stop a minute and put down maybe a definition or a term or a section that you might want to ask a little question about from E9. 30 seconds for that. Okay, so let's go on to, question here. Another question. What phase is therapeutic exploratory? Anybody have a different answer? Okay, Sammy, what is it? 2. Yeah, therapeutic exploratory, phase 2. Good. Okay. All right, so let's talk about E11. Clinical investigation of medicinal products in the pediatric population. Some very helpful information here, whether or not you're doing peds studies. It's it's pretty extensive. It's kind of amazing the amount of things you have to think about when you're doing a peds study compared to the standard adult study. So there's issues involved in doing peds studies, and I would suggest that you take a look at those and list those for yourself. I'm not gonna list them all here, but there's a whole section of issues, it's section 2, guidance, issues when initiating a pediatric product development program. There's like 10 things are listed here, so there's a lot of things to consider when you're dealing with a ped study. And there's also, what we have to consider is formulation, because sometimes pediatric patients can't take pills that are this size, so we have to think of some kinds of other kinds of formulations for them. And what are typical formulations for ped studies? They go through that here. What's one example? Liquid, yeah, liquid or injection perhaps. And another thing that they talk about in this guidance is the timing of the studies. Is this study, is this drug and this therapeutic indication exclusively for pediatric patients? Now, some of them are, some of them aren't. And what Isabel was saying was, when you have a drug for the general population, you should also be thinking about it for pediatric patients. But there are some therapeutic areas where it just occurs in children, and so those are the exclusively for peds. Is this a life-threatening situation? And how are you going to run a trial in life-threatening situations for pediatric patients? It's very emotional. Is this intended for other diseases or other conditions? Is this product that you're testing? So all of these are questions when you're running the trials. So another section of this, E11, is what kinds of studies, the types of studies are you going to do, and when is extrapolation appropriate or reasonable? So have any of you worked on peds studies before? Anybody? You have? How many? Who's worked on peds studies? Worked on peds studies? Currently working on peds studies. Okay, all right. So are there any key things that you would just say about working on a peds study?
No, only because I've only been here for 2 months.
Okay.
So this is also really
Okay, putting you in on the spot. Okay, all right. Okay.
I can answer that. So
Yes.
there's certain things that are very specific to an age group,
Yes.
for instance.
Okay. Yeah.
3 to
yeah.
5-year-old or 10 to 12-year-old.
Yeah, prepubescent or.
Very, very different.
Yes, okay, then that's a good point. So the other point is that, we kind of think of adults as this big bucket, but peds, they're sliced and diced into different categories is what you're saying. And that's that's a really good point, because one of the questions I gave you earlier was, what are the age classifications? And E11 is giving you specific age classifications because of that very reason. But it's on, let's see, what page is it on? It's on page 8. So they're suggesting they're even saying one possible categorization, and they are suggesting the years for these categories. So just what Sue said, because you have to think of different things in different age categories, they're providing them to you here. So you're not classified as an infant until you're 28 days old, I guess. So, I don't know. There's probably a scientific reason for that. That's beyond me. But anyway, so that's a good point, Sue. So there's actually so much to think about with respect to pediatric patients. So when could we realistically do PK studies? You're not going to be doing PK studies on a preterm infant that's 0 to 27 days old, pretty much. And what are unique elements for efficacy, and what are unique issues for safety? So these are the kinds of things that are discussed in designing these studies for peds patients, and there's information in here. I just went through the age classification from preterm newborns through adolescence. And there's also a section on ethical issues, which lists issues for IRB members to consider, and recruitment issues also. Sue, when you're dealing with studies, what would you say is one of your recruitment issues?
Well, you talk to the parents before you talk to the children. I've seen the opposite, which is not a good thing.
Okay, okay, that's good, voice of experience, okay. So, you know, it's all wrapped up here in one guidance document, but you can see from Sue's experience and what you'll be seeing is that, you know, it's way more complex than that. But I think it's really interesting that they have a specific guidance on it now. Is this something that you are familiar with, this guidance?
With what?
E11, have you read this E11 by any chance?
No.
Okay, okay, but, you know.
I've been a coordinator for a long time.
Right, I know. Well, see, that's the thing. This was one thing I learned when I was preparing for this class, was because E11 was not on the list of things to study for the exam, and I was like, oh, I've never seen this before. So, there you are. You're learning some things.
Isn't it indirectly in the city training? You know, no.
City training is.
They talk about pediatrics, but I don't think they talk specifically about E11.
Oh, no.
It's been a while since I've taken it, but I'm pretty sure they don't talk specifically about E11.
Okay.
I mean, they may mention things like, you know, assent and consent or something in city.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, maybe you want to take this back to your team and use E11, you know, for people who are new.
So,
Anyway,
I remember seeing a question about that case where maybe you would be able to answer, I got the answer wrong. The child said no to the research, and then the question was, well, what do? If the parents are consenting?
well, the parents say yes and the child says no.
What do you do?
Well, the child, any child above 7, at least in Stanford and probably elsewhere, has to sign an assent form. So a child can refuse. They can refuse any part of the test or something like that they don't want to do.
I think the only situation where the consent of the parent trumps the failure to assent of the child is in a life-threatening situation.
Okay.
So if it's age 7 to 17, the child has to affirmatively say yes to participate. And if they fail to say that, then that doesn't mean they participate. But if they say no, I think the only case is in a life-threatening situation. So if there's if research is the only possible treatment for whatever condition they have and it's life-threatening, then that would trump, the parent's consent would trump. But that's one situation, I think. Most of the time, they wouldn't do the research. The child would not participate if they did not assent. Yes.
Is that your
Yeah,
understanding?
I haven't been in treatment studies, I'm more on the behavioral end of things. So,
Okay.
yeah, but that certainly sounds usable.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the IRB would, you know, provide more guidance on that, but that's what I know about that situation.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right, just let's keep going. We've got a little bit more to cover here. So, so knowing the difference between consent and assent, what does that mean? What are the differences? How do we minimize risks? What attempts should be made to minimize the risk, and what attempts should be made to minimize distress? And I put lines up here. I thought he was being comforted. You don't want to distress a little 2-year-old. Okay, all right. So going through this and looking through some of these questions and answering them for yourself. Okay, so take another 30 seconds, look through E11 and just kind of make a note of where you might want to ask yourself a question. Ask a question for the team. one, and I'm gonna give you a few more minutes to write the questions actually in just a couple minutes. So I had planned to spend more time on E6 than we have today, because we were talking more about the other guidances. But I think you're pretty familiar with E6, or you should be. It's quite big, and I am reminding you that there is the revised version. So if you have an old booklet like this, it's out of date. So pull it up from the website. I have a new booklet, but it actually isn't very helpful because it doesn't really call out the addendum very clearly, the additions. So what I did was I printed out the version that's online because it's clearly identified. I can clearly identify what sections were changed and what was different and where the addendum were. It's pretty clear to see because it says addendum and then there's a little bar on each side of it, and you can highlight that to know that that's changed. So those of you who are very familiar with ICH E6, you'll want to make sure you know what has changed. Those of you who are not that familiar, you just need to make sure you become familiar with the entire E6. So that's what I did. So of course it's all important. I'm not going to say don't study some sections of it, but I think the most important parts and the hardest and the ones you need to memorize are the glossary, the principles, and the essential documents. So let's just go over that for just real briefly. The glossary will give you all these terms. My example this morning was vulnerable patients, and that's a pretty extensive list, and you should read it and memorize it. So there's a lot of glossary terms that I think you can quiz yourself on, quiz your study partners on, and make sure you really know the definitions from that glossary. And if there are some that are confusing, like adverse drug reactions and adverse events and serious events, spend more time on those for yourself. So guide yourself by looking through the glossary. I would memorize all the principles. I would know the 13 principles by heart, and I would compare those to the Declaration of Helsinki. There are connections that are direct and connections that are not quite so direct, but I would do that. I would, then running through the other sections, there's a whole section on IRBs and IECs. What section number is that? I asked you that earlier. Now the rubber hits the road here.
3, right?
Aha, section 3, exactly. So in 3, you need to know what is the responsibilities, the composition, the procedures, and the records for IRBs and IECs. And this is a hot one that they will ask you, how many members have to be on an IRB, and how long do they have to keep the records, and blah, blah, blah. So that's a big one, and Isabel was shaking her head. Yes.
Yeah, it's like because it's like 2 have to be, under this category, they have to at least have 5, and that's one of the questions I do remember, because I was like, what the? Yeah. So again, so my tip is if there's a number of things, like 2 members have to be women, whatever it says. 5 members have to be on it, and 2 can't be, like
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Memorize it, because it's an easy one for them to ask you, so memorize it. Okay, investigator section, which is the next one, section 4. Review all the responsibilities and the terms that you don't frequently use. This one might be a little bit easier for those in this room because you're in an investigator-driven situation. You're on the site side, but you need to look at the terms that you don't normally think about. Who has seen or read an investigator's brochure? Raise your hand.
From cover to cover, or just?
At least you've seen one, at least you know what it looks like. Okay, so about half of you. Okay, investigator's brochure. It's not something you write or deal with much, I would think, but you need to understand the key sections of an investigator's brochure. Read one. Find one and read one. At least look through the table of contents so you know what they're talking about when they're talking about investigator's brochure. That would help you in the test. For the sponsor section, just review those requirements, understand what contract research organizations do, understand what sponsors are supposed to do, and understand what monitoring is all about. And punch up the areas that you don't work on much. The next section is protocols, so you need to understand those key sections of a protocol, and understand why they are so prescriptive in ICH as to what goes into a protocol where, for consistency. Same with IB, it's very prescriptive. And the last one is very important, and it's essential documents. Memorize it. Memorize essential documents.
It's pretty long.
It is long, but you can, and I'm not saying you have to be able to list, if I say, what do you have to collect before a study? You don't have to sit there and list the 37 topics, titles of things. But one of the things that you should know is that a 1572 form is not part of the essential documents list. Why not? We collect it all the time. It's in our files, it's in our trial files. Why isn't it an essential document?
It's not international.
Exactly, Leslie. It's not an internationally required document. So that's what I'm saying. You really know what's in there, and they will ask you trick questions about essential documents, believe me. Okay.
Patty?
Yes,
I just have a
yeah.
question. When you said
Yes.
protocol and key sections, there's a section in here outside of essential documents that describes key sections of a protocol?
Yeah, there's a whole, yeah, look at it, yeah, it's 6.
So this is gonna sound like a really silly question, but it's kind of come up new for us. To actually have a protocol document, is that considered a requirement under ACH? Because
Yes.
there's a train of thought here that if you just enter information into the e-protocol application, that's sufficient.
If I were an FDA inspector, what would you give me?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
But, you can
That's
print out
the answer.
But you can print out the application. But you know what, we should compare that to the
My
sections.
understanding that you have to have a protocol.
I think you have to have a
this
protocol.
comes up a
But
lot.
I don't know
That's,
what,
that was our answer.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
Yeah.
after we got the shock look off of our
A
face.
face, yeah.
That would be good. So we have to have something to stand on.
The IRB won't ask you for that?
The IRB does
It's
not,
interesting.
the IRB
They will not
reviews the
come back and
application.
say you have not attached a separate protocol, but we
So-
have this issue with our division PI initiated trials, and I say to them, you need a protocol.
Yeah.
And a separate freestanding protocol.
Right.
With amendment and version dates, and, so this is interesting, I find that the IRB doesn't flag that.
So I was just gonna ask you, you're saying that you're telling your PIs you need to have a document, but the IRB is not?
The IRB never comes back to us
Yeah.
and says,
Right.
where's your freestanding protocol? So
Right.
the PI thinks they've submitted a protocol.
Exactly, and that's what we're finding, is they think they've submitted a protocol, and then there's a lot of
No.
disconnects between amendments and things don't get.
Oh, yeah.
But,
Yep.
yeah, okay, so it's not just us.
So
So this would be good.
Yeah, I would point to section 6 and the essential documents and E8. E8's all about what you should have in your protocol and what it should look like. And this is saying that, this is how a protocol should be written. You should have these sections, it's clearly
So
outlined.
we can
Bing,
compare
bing,
that
bing,
against
bing, bing.
the sections that, of the protocol as well.
Well, if it's all matches.
Yeah.
So theoretically speaking, whether you call it protocol or e-protocol, it is, should be identical because
Mhm.
one is being presented in electronic format,
Yes.
other is being presented on a paper. And there is a 21 CFR Part 11 regulation
Yes,
that governs electronic document
right.
to be equivalent to the paper.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so I do not understand why e-protocol should not be acceptable, because that is equivalent to the regular protocol on the paper.
All the information is
Is all the information
Yeah, I was just
Yeah.
gonna
in
ask that,
e-protocol?
it all,
Absolutely.
it's, yeah, I was gonna
Is
say,
it
I don't know if it is.
Is it signed off,
Is what signed off.
the protocol, signed by your PI?
I mean, they do the obligations form, that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, the components are all in there, I mean, you're right about the content, but it's still different to me, I mean, it's,
Why
you're
not?
submitting to a sponsor or to even a funding agency like the NIH, you need a protocol. A free, you know, it's.
Yeah, how
Well-
does NIH get your protocol?
That has been done in the past. You can send an electronic protocol. I think moving forward in the few years,
Right.
many trials will be totally electronic.
Okay, I'm not gonna get into this discussion. I would just say,
Yeah, it's an
if,
interesting issue,
if e-protocol has everything that sponsors, NIH, auditors need and can have access to it,
Yeah,
we're fine.
absolutely.
So if they don't, then you have to provide, if it's not all in e-protocol, it has to all be somewhere. And it can be electronic or paper, it just has to be all somewhere.
Yes, and that is what the electronic means.
Yes, but I don't know what
Yeah.
e-protocol means in your system.
Right, it doesn't
It's-
That's
the-
not
the
necessarily
format is
connected.
different, it's not the same sequence, and you can't track amendments, you can't do the,
So
the
you have to be able
red
to track amendments.
I mean, you have to have that.
track amendments in the
And-
You
RSP, but
can't.
it's just
Well, in the
it's
RFP, but not for us as a user.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway, it's
Yeah,
an
okay.
One can
interesting
track the
issue.
amendment very easily.
So Marianne, that would be something that maybe Kira / Spectrum or somebody could help answer for your people. And if you are getting pushback from something, you know, then you maybe can get some help from the regulatory people here. And if you're not, you know, I don't know. Okay. Okay, so let's write a question about E6.
Do you need a protocol?
Yeah, there you go. Right, but, okay, so now what I want to do for like 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, I want you to go back and look at your little notes to yourself. And if you have time to write 1 or 2 questions is fine. The idea would be write a question on a card, a clean card, that you're gonna pass around to somebody else. So something like, how many members of the IRB are required? Okay, write a question, and on the back, put the answer and the reference section, at least your E thing, okay? I'm gonna give you 4 or 5 minutes. You can write 1, 2, or 3 questions.
Were we supposed to have a clean card?
You need a clean card, you got it, you got it, yeah.
I was just waiting, 2 questions.
It's fine, if you, yeah. So the request is write 1 question with the answer on the back for your team. Okay, one more minute, then we're gonna pull together. Okay, I'm gonna collect the questions from everybody. Thank you. Another minute. Okay, 30 seconds. Collect the questions from everybody. Thank you. All right. Keeping your brain power going here. Right. And anybody else got one? Couple more. All right. Now, who's taking the exam? If you're taking the exam, you get a question or two from the team as practice questions, okay? If you're not taking the exam, your team just helped you with it. So, do you have any other questions outstanding here, floating around? One more? Another one or two? No, Julia. All right. Anybody, any other ones? Okay, all right, so who's taking the exam? Okay. You get 2 questions. Well, how many people are gonna take the exam soon? Raise your hand big. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4?
I'm planning to.
4, 5. Okay, I've got 5 people. Okay, I think we can give you 2 cards. Okay. What color did you have? Purple?
I am purple.
Okay. Anybody over here gonna take the exam? You are. What color did you have?
Yellow.
Okay, we're not gonna give you yellow. We're gonna give you something else. Okay. And if there's leftovers, you can have them too. Okay, you're taking the exam, you had blue, right? Okay, so, we know we're not giving you back your question, and you're taking the exam, you had pink, and you're taking the exam, and you had pink. Pink, okay, there you go. Anybody else gonna take the exam? Okay, here's another one. Another one. There's another one for you. Who else? You had pink. What do you have? Yellow. Who needs one? You need one? How many did you have? Oh, you don't. Okay. All right. So let's do the last few bits here. Using my clicker. And then we have to be out of here by 11. So the last few bits, and then I'm going to go over the questions from this morning. All right. So my tips are identify your own gaps. And I gave you that blue piece of paper. So again, you might want to think about using this as what are your gaps, what are your strengths, what are some ideas, what are some lessons learned here. I've kind of given you a progress list, so if you want to confirm your eligibility and apply for the exam and start studying, but here's your idea. So what are your own gaps? Maybe it's E11 because you've never looked at it before, for instance, or maybe it's memorizing safety terms. What are they? I would suggest creating a study plan and start soon to do something every week because September comes up pretty quickly, right? And also another idea that I don't have on here that we just talked about was if there are workshops or classes that would augment your training, just like the summary of study design, or what do you, I don't know.
Phases of research and clinical trial design. Yep.
Phases of research and clinical trial design, that would be an excellent thing to do also. Do some practice test questions. There are, go online to ACRP, read through all their information. There are study packets that you can get, and you can get them and share them with other people if you have a study group. So that's what I would suggest. Doing practice test questions was one of the most helpful things that I did. And there is an electronic practice test online that you can take twice. And it gives you a good feel for taking it on a computer under a certain time frame and answering the questions right. And it gives you the answers, you get the answers, so you know if you get them right or not.
It's not free, it's $100.
Yeah, it costs money, I don't know how much it costs, yeah. But you could also, you could share that with friends too, if you want to, yeah.
$20 a pop.
Yeah, right. I would say if you're taking it at a center, it was very helpful for me to actually drive to the center at the time of day when you're gonna take the test, 8 a.m., there's lots of traffic, if it was 2 a.m., there's kids getting out of school, blah, 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 whatever. Just to get a real good feel for where it is and how you park and how you get there and everything, because you don't wanna be late and you don't wanna be frazzled and all of that, so that's a suggestion. And the other suggestion is, I have to eat every 2 hours, so when I have to sit down for a 3-hour exam, by 2.5 hours I'm starving, so eat breakfast and get a good night's sleep before. Okay, so take the practice exam on the website, use the researcher self-study questions as good questions, just trying to read an article and answer questions about it. I think that's another way to take some practice questions. Write questions with a study buddy. Find somebody you're going to study with, even if it's virtual. And form some kind of a study group. It could be an online study group. I just worked with a couple of gals who took it this spring and had a group of 3 people that met every Friday afternoon for 2 hours. And they felt that was the way that really helped them study for it. So find somebody who's taking it and go for it. I also think, I said earlier, it's easy to overthink a question, so don't do the what if thing. Realize that the list is short, but there's a lot of material. Look how long that E9 was, it's like 30 pages, it's like, So there's a lot of material to review, so give yourself plenty of time to do it. And my tip is, if you don't think you're gonna pass, don't tell anybody you're taking the exam. Kira's already told us all she's taking the exam. She shouldn't have done that. Nope. So yeah, just keep it on the lowdown, and then if you do pass, you're like, oh, pass the ACRP exam. If you don't, you'll be like, oh, this black cloud hanging over you. All right, that's my tip. Okay, so what are the steps you're going to take to prepare for the exam? Think about it a minute. You've got your little blue worksheet here, and maybe make yourself just a note if you're going to do the exam, what's going to work for you. All right, we're going to, we looked at the objectives. We talked about advantages of certification. We talked about what's covered on the exam, the types of questions. We reviewed all the ICH guidelines. We took some practice questions, and I'm going to go over the answers with you just now. What you wanted to learn today was some kind of safety management information. I pointed you to E2A. I don't know the real question, but if you need more information, Kira can point you in the right direction. We took an overview here. There is an e-consent guideline. There's more electronic document guidelines coming up. We didn't cover that. It's not covered on the exam, but it is there. We covered this. Somebody want to talk about sponsored clinical trials, what they're all about? Who asked that question?
I did.
You did.
Partly covered.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, all right. So again, if there's other resources you need, let us know. Okay, all right, great. So before we go, let's talk about the answers to the questions. People are interested in that. Kira said she wanted to know that. So do we need to do the calculations for B, the answer 1B? You want me to quickly run through that, or are you guys okay with that?
No, if you could run through that, that would be helpful.
Okay, well, let me just quickly run through it, and as long as you don't argue with me, I think I get it right. Okay, so real quickly, there were 30 screened patients, and they were paid $50 each. That's $1,500. There were 10 enrolled that were paid $225 each. There were, the visits were 10 times $120 times 12 months times 3 years, which I calculated to be $43,200. And there were 10 patients that also had $300 worth of labs times 4, which was $12,000. So add that all up, and that should be $58,950. And if it's not right, sorry. But that's what I did. So anyway, that's how I did it. So you guys couldn't do the math. You can take a picture of that or whatever. Let's move on. But that's what I think the answer is. Okay. Choose the correct definition for unexpected adverse drug reaction, and I referenced you E2A for this. So B is the definition of an adverse event. C is the definition for an adverse drug reaction. D is the definition for a serious adverse event. So A is the right answer. Unexpected adverse drug reaction is A. Am I going too fast? No, okay. 3, the answer is the IB, because that's where you find information about AEs in former trials, is the investigator's pusher.
3 is D. She said C.
D.
She said the IB.
Question
D.
3, the answer is D as in dog.
Yeah, but you had said
The IB.
C
You would
before.
say C.
I did?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Question 3, okay, I was going too fast, sorry. Question 3, I said the answer was D as in dog. Okay, question 4, the answer is C. Objectives should not be lengthy and complex. Question 5, the answer is D as in dog, because Bayesian design is not a design configuration of a clinical trial. You guessed it because you'd never heard that word before, so it must be wrong. Okay. C, the answer is A. This is again a what's the best thing to do? I don't think we need to discuss that one. And 7, I don't have my reference here, but 7 is D as in dog, only one safety variable. And the reason it's nothing else is because it's a phase 3 trial. So you're going to have, so when designing a phase 3 trial, the primary variable should be one safety variable. That was the best choice of those. Okay, 8. The answer is 3, because A, B, and D are all correct. This was a question about bias. I think I got that from E9, E8 or 9. And question 9, I already told you the answer to that. 1572 forms are not essential documents, so the answer is B as in boy. And 10, which is not true, is B as in boy, chairman of the department. We should not be sending that information to the chairman of the department. You might send it, but that's not what the regs require. And 11, the answer is D as in dog. It would be really great if we had a dedicated nurse educator for every clinical trial, but we don't have to do that. Right. Okay, any questions or concerns? We are going to email you a certificate of completion based on those of you who signed in. And I think that's it.
Yeah, and just please make sure you pick up all your trash and don't leave anything behind.
We have to be out. Somebody's supposed to be coming in at 11, so we're out of here. So thank you very much. I had an enjoyable morning, and good luck on your career and or research or taking exams. Okay, thanks. Okay.
that's,
That's
so
very
there
seldom.
is no,
Bring the binders around.
no, it's fine, yeah, but they were another class.
Okay, I'm glad. Okay.
But they do cover regulations, and that's what we're trying to do. Reading regulations, then,
Which regulations?
yes, they
Take care. Good luck.
Yes. A lot.
Okay.
54, 56, 12, 14, 12.
Okay, when I can.
So, what's your plan?
You know,
Well, I'm reading, you know, but I'm kind of,
I'm sure.
What's your best study technique?
my best study technique is taking exams. So I already took one exam from the CR coach, not the 100 hours, the one I taught before that they explained the types of questions. And they gave you some examples, a lot of examples of questions. But I'm thinking I should
but I'm
get
not
the
leaving.
100 exam
I'll
prep
be here,
to
I'm
go
moving to
through
Colorado, but
twice. And other than that, I'm just reading. I already study a lot for the Stanford.
I'll be here, so I'm still a
clinical
resource,
research.
just
So
won't
that
be,
helped me.
in
Are
the
you
office
taking the
for
exam?
week. I'll be
No,
coming
I
back
took
every
it.
month.
Good already. So I would suggest
Yeah,
I do, I do
Thanks, Donna.
Yeah.
So if that's your style, you can try that, to just, you know, highlights of things and then you can answer questions. So the other thing you might do is, I know there are a couple gals
So,
who are gonna
it's digital.
study,
You have to go
so
to
you could maybe
Helsinki.
start.
Or in a hotel or
That
something.
That doesn't help you, okay.
I have my own style.
Your style, okay.
I don't know if you
So,
should.
another thing you might do is write yourself questions
No,
as you're going through the material.
Which is about the same as the cards.
Yeah.
You know,
Cards,
you go
yes.
through difficulties and you say, okay, I need to get that
Yeah,
more.
right, so you,
For the
you're taking
for
tests
the-
helps you, I
For
would
the
give yourself
exam
tests.
prep questions.
That would be
Take.
another way to do it.
Do you mean for, to prep or to actually take the exam?
To prep.